I'm joined now by our own Dr. Joe Sirven of the Saturday WJCT program. What's health got to do with it? He visits us every month for a house call to talk about medical news and to take calls and questions. If you have a question, you can give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email Dr. Joe at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. And if you don't want us to use your first or last name, that's fine too. You can just let us know. Dr. Joe, welcome.
And always a pleasure to be here. Happy July.
Happy July. It's so fun to have you back. I
It's
can't
great
believe
to
the
be
year is
here.
flying by quite so quickly. But,
Absolutely.
so I'd like to start with a health warning that was issued by the CDC last Tuesday for something called dengue fever. It's not something that we hear too much about in this country. Tell us a little bit about what it is and why the warning.
So, dengue fever is a mosquito borne infection. So, you only catch it from mosquitoes that have the infection. The problem is the mosquitoes love hot, humid weather. And normally it's something that's super common in tropical areas. And in the U.S., where the focus has been primarily places like Puerto Rico, and as you start going down towards a more tropical weather. But as you just had a nice segment on heat in general, as the weather gets hotter and more humid, we attract those mosquitoes, and those mosquitoes now have the ability to infect people with this dengue fever. Dengue fever is it's otherwise known as breakbone fever. The reason is because in people who do get it, the more severe forms of it, it feels as though your bones are breaking. Like you have these terrible joint aches.
Wow.
Along with the fever and things of that sort.
So excruciating.
It is very unpleasant. Now, it's unusual. What's unusual about this infection is that if you get it for the first time, it tends to be less severe, oddly enough. You may even have it and not even know you had it. Where people get the severe versions is when you're exposed to it the second, third, or fourth time.
Huh.
That's when your immune system goes awry and it produces all of these symptoms. And that's why it is so essential to kind of be mosquito preventative, if you will.
We are starting to see some cases in the U.S.
They're not, the numbers are now ratcheting up here in the U.S., enough that the CDC is urging concerns. And mostly, again, it's been Puerto Rico, things of that sort. But they are watching to see how these numbers rise, because in the Americas, so as you start going to the Caribbean, the cruises not far from where we all are, those numbers are way ahead because it's just hot and humid where these mosquitoes are. So this is, again, a mosquito preventative aspect. So the things that we do to try to not get bitten is what's essential that we do now.
And you say it's not something that you can transmit person to person, but if somebody travels abroad or, to a place, a region that has these mosquitoes, they get bit, they can actually transmit it via a mosquito bite if they return here.
Exactly. And so now as people are out cruising to Caribbean or flying or wherever, that is how it works. And again, it's all about the mosquitoes. So remember, they love to feed at dusk and dawn, wear long sleeves, things of that sort.
If you're just joining us, I'm talking with our own Dr. Joe Sirven. He's here for his monthly house call to talk medical headlines and to answer your healthcare questions if you have them. You can call 904-549-2937, or you can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I want to ask you about a headline from the Sunday New York Times we discussed a little bit before the show, but is real interesting. It continues their reporting on the brain impacts of blast weapons and the exposure, in this case particularly Navy SEALs who were not seeing those blasts in combat or direct warfare, but were doing a lot of training with them. Those symptoms that they're experiencing very like PTSD, or what we think of as PTSD.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, and I think this is one of those stories that we will wait to hear even more as details emerge. But what they found is that they were able to study the brains of people, Navy SEALs in this case, that had committed suicide. And of this small group, but had these analyses, every one of them had some type of blast exposure. So this starts to say that some folks that get this type of exposure, this type of damage from blast exposure, could cause almost psychological, psychiatric effects that lead to depression. It's a correlation. They haven't proven it yet, but it brings out this big question of like, how do we protect people who are in the front lines with blasts and things of that sort? And it's another element in the story of just traumatic brain injury and how it connects to behavior and mental health in general. And maybe that's part of post-traumatic stress that we will learn, but there's so much more that is yet to be investigated. This was, I think, an important story that they put out there just to kind of that call to action, if you will.
And this is a military town. Obviously, there's a lot of people that, are active military. There's a lot of retired military. And one thing that was interesting in this report was, the survivors of these suicide victims had said they didn't think that PTSD necessarily fit. They were getting those diagnoses because they were suffering these same kinds of things: terrible insomnia, unexplained rage, disconnected feeling, inability to concentrate. A lot of times those very same symptoms are diagnosed as more of a psychological diagnoses of PTSD. And this finding that those may well be, caused by a physical exposure as opposed to a psychological one.
Yeah, that's a really good point. What it tells me is, especially someone who is in my area of medicine and neurology, a lot of times the same organ that you feel that can have damage, that has psychological issues, is the brain. And yes, the symptoms to which these folks had in terms of a blast exposure can certainly look a lot like PTSD. And maybe they do that because there's some mechanism that they both operate under that is so similar. It's just that how they got there were very different. One was through a physical injury, the other one being a psychological exposure. But perhaps it's the same circuits that are involved. And that has to be teased out for us to know it. But yeah, it's fair that we shouldn't just kind of say this is stress. These people deserve being looked at.
It's a very interesting study. I look forward to kind of staying current on that because I know it's still an emerging science. I want to move on to a topic because it's a busy travel weekend coming up.
Yeah.
A lot of people will be flying. For a lot of those people, alcohol will play a part. But there's a new study that highlights the risks of drinking and flying. What tell us about that?
So this one was a very interesting study where people that they actually did a randomization to see what people their oxygen levels with alcohol, and clearly when people drank alcohol, it lowered oxygen level. Well, if you go and fly on a plane, that pressurized cabin mimics living at an altitude of approximately anywhere between 7,000 to 8,000 feet, where oxygen is a little lower. So if you add alcohol to that, you are traveling like as though you're a little bit above Denver, Colorado, and your oxygen level is falling with that. You're just kind of putting yourself at a risk, if you will, from a cardiac standpoint or shortness of breath issues, if you're prone to it. And it's just another reminder that maybe alcohol is not the best approach on a plane. I know it's stressful. I just got off of one, and trust me, I'm the first one that wants to get that cocktail, but it's not good for our health in that environment.
It was interesting that the blood saturation, the oxygen saturation levels that they were looking at, because they found that for people who are sleeping, particularly if they were sleeping after drinking and they were on a plane, that their oxygen levels were dropping down to about 85%, which I guess is far below ideal.
Way below ideal. I mean, that puts you in the category of like sleep apnea, where you are just not getting enough oxygen to function well. And those are real impediments to health. And that's why I always, as I look and watch to see how many people order cocktails on planes, I'm all like, no, I want to be the one. Don't do it. It's not a good idea. But yes, it has this profound effect. Everyone thinks that alcohol helps you sleep better. Not really. It actually leads to a more disturbed sleep because of these things. Its other effects on oxygen and things like that.
Interesting. I want to move just to touch at least a little bit on the Surgeon General
Yeah.
has issued a couple of really interesting, very different recommendations. One on social media, one about how we should be regarding guns.
Yeah. So Dr. Vivek Murthy, the Surgeon General of the U.S., put out they were pretty rapid order succession of two big warnings of you. The first one being on social media. That one he urged that there should be a warning label on social media platforms. The idea is that for young children, particularly adolescents and developing children, that it is unhealthy. And on one level, I applaud him completely. We definitely have a social media issue. The question that arises is a warning label the way to do that? The Where critics have now come back at him after a few days of this being out has been in the area. Well, is all social media bad? And all the nuances that kind of come to it. Clearly spending too much time with social media, and too much time is now, they've done studies on this, is where you are like at 2, 3, 4, 5 hours a day straight of doing this is going to be problematic for a developing child.
And the guns thing is also kind of a diametric, perhaps opposed or different at least, but another recommendation he's come out with so quickly.
So on the gun issue, he says that we are in a public health crisis, not emergency, and that we need to be looking at how we can best prevent gun injuries, because now in deaths from guns and things of that sort has now become one of the top let's say, physical health rationale for the death of children in the U.S. And as a result, that's why he says it's become a public health crisis and has a lot of mandates or suggestions of what needs to be done to shore that up.
Yeah, and increasingly looking at treating gun violence as kind of a health matter more than.
And the truth is, when something goes wrong with guns, death or anything, it does show up in hospitals and healthcare. So there is a point to be made there.
Dr. Joe, thank you so much for being here. You can hear Dr. Joe's program, What's Health Got to Do with It, every Saturday at 4 on WJCT. It's always great to see you.
And always great to see you. Happy 4th.
Yeah, thank you. You too.
Thank you.